Welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, available on Pacifica Radio Network, Progressive Radio Network, iHeartRadio, on iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud, and the complete archives are available at opednews.com/podcasts with an S. There are over 400 interviews there. My guest for this show is Dr. Mardy Grothe. Grothe. My guest for this show is Dr. Mardy Grothe. He's a retired psychologist and the author of 7 previous quotation anthologies, including Oxymoronica, Viva la Repartee, I Never Metaphor I Didn't Like, and Metaphors Be With You. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
You've just written a new book, Deconstructing Trump.
Yes.
Which is a really fun book. The subtitle is The Trump Phenomenon Through the Lens of Quotation History. Tell us about how you came about doing this book.
Well, I've been collecting quotations for more than 50 years. It all started for me when I was in college, and I came across a book I know you're familiar with, Walden, by Henry David Thoreau, and there were a couple of passages in Walden that just blew my mind. I ended up writing them down on 3x5 note cards and, keeping them to help remind me of what needed to be reminded me of in those days. And that just gradually moved me into the realm of quotation collecting. And one of the reasons I've been looking forward to this interview with you is I know that you also are a quotation collector. So around 1990, I came across a word called chiasmus. Chiasmus. I'd never seen the word in my whole life. I looked up the dictionary definition, and it said a reversal in the order of words in 2 parallel phrases. Well, that wasn't all that fantastic, but the example was from a great poet who said, pleasure's a sin, and sometimes sin's a pleasure. And I thought, ooh, that's kind of cool. And then about a week later, I happened to come across a Mae West quote, it's not the men in my life, it's the life in my men. And I thought to myself, wow, that's an example of that device. I couldn't remember the name of it.
Chiasmus. I love that word, too.
Well, at any rate, that led me eventually.
Do you know the etymology of that word, the root?
I absolutely do. It comes from the Greek chiazein, which means to mark with an X. And in every example of chiasmus, we've just mentioned 2, but another very, very popular one, of course, is John Kennedy's ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. If you take any single example of chiasmus and connect the key words, you mark an X between them. And that, of course, was the title of my first book, Never Let a Fool Kiss You or a Kiss Fool You. So that's what got me started.
That's great. But I'm a if there's a bibliomaniac who's somebody who's obsessed with books, and I think we're both quotation maniacs as well. Yeah, now, my getting started with it is with my work with heartwarming. I discovered by making a tape on relaxation that if people thought of a heartwarming experience, that it would turn on all the right physiology. People would relax more. Yeah. And I tried to research it, and there was no research on it. I went to Index Medicus and Psych Abstracts, and there was nothing. But the quotation books is where I found people talking about it. So that's what got me on my path, which led me to acquire hundreds of quotation books, to start a quotation website, which is now defunct, but a quotation database that's at opednews.com, and which made it such a pleasure to find a kindred spirit in you.
Yeah. Rudyard Kipling once said, words are the most powerful drug used by mankind. And that's exactly what you were talking about just there a moment ago. You were looking for quotations that would have a calming effect on people. And the nice thing about quotations, see, I think we take a bad rap when we call ourselves quotation lovers, because we're not essentially quotation lovers, we're idea lovers. And all a quotation is, if you think about it, is a big, powerful, wonderful idea wrapped very nicely in a gift package for us. And so ideas can be soothing, they can be exciting, they can be challenging, they can play so many roles in our lives. One of my favorite quotations from Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. is, he said, once a mind is stretched by a new idea, it never shrinks back to its former dimensions. So it's a great idea, and it's well phrased, so it becomes a quotation that guys like you and me love.
And to me, quotations are like gems or jewels. They're ideas that wise people have summarized in very smart ways. And collecting them is kind of like creating a necklace of those gems or jewels, really.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, we're true collectors, not unlike butterfly collectors or stamp collectors. You know, they love their area of specialty as much as we love ours. But I think what we get out of collecting quotations that a butterfly collector doesn't get, or maybe a stamp collector doesn't get, is we get these wonderful, wonderful ideas that we can carry with us. And those ideas, by the way, can really help us during times of great need.
Absolutely. No question about it. I can't imagine writing a book or even most articles without including quotations. Now, a lot of times, if you're a journalist, you're writing quotations from what people have said that is relevant to the news.
Yes.
If you're writing a book, though, then you're going to be finding quotations. What do you call a quotation that's at the beginning of a chapter?
An epigram?
Well,
epigraph.
Epigraph.
Yes.
You're going to use one that kind of summarizes some of the ideas in the chapter, and it's really fun to do that. I've done that for friends for their books. I mean, searching for quotations is really a joyful pleasure of treasure hunting, really.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. So.
By the way, just on the subject of epigraphs, now that I've become a reasonably well-known author, I get lots and lots and lots of people who write me to say, would you give me some advice or help on this book that I'm preparing? And I always, when they do that, I always say two things. One is, do you want me to tell you what you want to hear, or do you want me to tell you what I really think? Because one of the things I discovered is when people ask for advice, they really are asking for corroboration and confirmation.
That's quotable.
It is. It's a W. Somerset Maugham quote, by the way. Yeah. See, we steal ideas from everybody, right? Yeah. But I usually try to cite that one when I use it. And so they always say, "Oh, no, please, tell me exactly what you think." And I will tell you that over the last 25 years, I've read their material, and it's usually, see, most people when they write a book, people who really aren't professional writers, they think when they write a first draft, that's pretty much their best thinking. What professional writers know is that it's never your best, and even at maybe the 7th edition or the 12th rewriting of it. But they're just sending something out, and it's usually less than excellent, to be kind. And so one of the things I've always done with people is I said, I don't want to talk to you again until you've read William Zinzer's book on writing well. I've probably sold 150 copies of Zinzer's books. He should be paying me a royalty. And every single person who stayed with me during this little journey of theirs has read Zinzer's book. They've revised their first draft and begun to think I'm going to have to revise this 3 or 4 or 5 times, perhaps, before I get to the end. But the second thing that I have advised them to do is begin every chapter with an epigraph.
Yeah. So, but wait, I need a quote from you now. I'm pretty sure you'll know what it is. Hemingway had something to say about first drafts. But now just remember, this is broadcast on radio, so you got to.
Well, you know, of course, and I know we said something on first drafts, but you're proving that I can't come up with an easy.
No, it was something like the first draft is SH*T. And, you know, I ran a conference on this.
There's no question that he believed that every first draft was a piece of crap. And he had to stay with it, you know, and he's the guy that said his goal was to write one perfect sentence. And I always thought, ooh, isn't that a nice phrase?
One perfect sentence. The only thing is, you got to write another one after that, and then another one, and another one.
That's what makes it hard.
Because to be a writer, you don't write a sentence, you write a story.
Yeah, yeah. But you write it one sentence at a time.
That might be quotable there.
That might be.
So let's talk a little bit about your book. Now, Deconstructing Trump, the Trump phenomenon through the lens of quotation history. And then in the beginning of the book, you talk about how what you've done is you've used quotations that describe Trump, and none of them are from the 21st century.
That is correct. Every single one of the 1,000 quotations in this book comes from last century, or more typically, many, many, many centuries ago. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start by just talking about how this book idea came to me in the first place.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Because even during the writing of the book, I didn't think I was writing a book. And now you remember very clearly, I'm sure everybody that's viewing this remembers it as well. In July of 2015, there was a presidential forum in Ames, Iowa, in which a respected Republican pollster named Frank Luntz was interviewing an upstart Republican candidate named Donald Trump. And this was the interview in which John McCain questioned the war hero status of Senator McCain.
You mean Trump questioned the war heroes? Say that again.
Okay, this was the interview in which Donald Trump questioned the war hero status of John McCain. And he did this before a Republican crowd, so they weren't particularly happy with this. In fact, after that interview, I think 12 of the 19 other Republican candidates for president called upon Trump to resign. And it was a nasty thing for him to do. But, you know, he has a long history of doing exactly this kind of thing. So anyway, that happened. I saw this in the news again and again and again, and I have never been a fan of Donald Trump because I went to graduate school in New York. You know, I'm fairly familiar about his long history. You know, and he's always been a vain, narcissistic man who lacks a moral core center. I mean, so I've never been a fan of Trump.
And to use your words, he does the nasty in a plethora of ways.
In a plethora of ways. And, you know, every single one of his bankruptcies was done basically to cheat thousands of hardworking contractor, blue-collar types mainly, you know, out of their hard-earned salaries. I mean, so I've never been a fan of Trump. But anyway, a month after the Ames, Iowa event, I happened to be reading a 1995 translation of a Molière play written in the 1600s called Tartuffe. And normally I only get a chance briefly to mention the quotation that started this, but if you don't mind, I'd like to tell you what happened. So I'm reading this book and I come across these words. I have to put on my glasses. Those who have greatest cause for guilt and shame are quickest to besmirch a neighbor's name. Well, yeah. What was my first thought? It's probably the thought you're having right now. Wow, that sounds like Donald Trump.
Sure does.
And the passage goes on, and just, you know, close your eyes as I read this, because this is going to just, I think, grab you as it grabbed me. I'll read it kind of in poetic cadence, because that's the way Molière wrote it. He said, "Those who have greatest cause for guilt and shame are quickest to besmirch a neighbor's name. When there's a chance for libel, they never miss it. When something can be made to seem illicit, they're off at once to spread the joyous news, adding to fact what fantasies they choose. By talking up their neighbors' indiscretions, they seek to camouflage their own transgressions, hoping that others' innocent affairs will lend a hue of innocence to theirs, or that their own black guilt will come to seem part of a general shady color scheme." Well, this is in August of 2015, a month after that McCain remark, and I'm still thinking also about Trump's role in the Obama birther scam. I read these words and they just literally stop me in my tracks. In fact, they were so perfect, I actually said to myself, I wonder if Wilbur's 1995 translation of that passage is accurate. So I went back and I found a 1908 translation of Tartuffe, and I'll just read the first two lines, but they confirmed for me that Wilbur was conveying what Molière said accurately. The first two lines are, "Those whose own conduct's most ridiculous are always quickest to speak ill of others." Well, I wrote this quote down because, you know, just like you and 10,000 other quotation collectors out there, we record quotations when we find them. So
now, wait, I just want to say one thing. You have a database on your website. What's your website?
Well, I have a website called www.drmardy.com. It's drmardy.com. And on that website, I have something I call Dr. Mardy's Dictionary of Metaphorical Quotations. It contains 40,000 quotations organized into 2,500 categories. So, and they're all sourced and authenticated. I mean, there are so many false, inaccurate, apocryphal quotations on the internet that one of my missions in life is I want to just make sure that when people are using a quotation, they're using an accurate one. So,
all right, well, I don't want to get into that. I agree with you. It is a problem.
Yeah.
I know that when I was writing my book, Bottom Up Revolution,
yeah,
I found that some of my favorite quotations were not ones that I could confirm. Yeah, and it's a challenge. And even though they may be cited, you'll find 50,000 Google references to them.
Yeah.
None of those actually give a good source. But I want to move on because I want you to talk about how you got moving from finding a Molière quote to doing a book of 1,000 quotes.
Okay, so this is the first one I found. I just recorded it, thinking nothing else. Well, about a week later, I found a quote from Thomas Carlyle. Nothing reveals a man's littleness so much as his disbelief in great men. And I'm thinking, ooh, that kind of fits along the same kind of theme. And then very gradually over the next several weeks and months, I began to find quotations that kind of spoke to me about Donald Trump. When I saw the famous Maya Angelou quote, when people tell you who they are, believe them. I thought,
boy, that's one I think about a lot. You know, when you meet new people, that's one to really people show you who they are. That is a piece of wisdom that every person should memorize.
You know, I mean, when Maya Angelou first introduced that thought to Oprah Winfrey, by the way, she was talking about the men in Oprah Winfrey's life, and basically saying, look at Oprah, when people show you who they are, you know, believe them. At any rate, I find that Maya Angelou quote. A little bit later now, I find a quote from Virginia Woolf that says, oh, here I've got it. I want to show it to you if I may. I made it, I printed it up from my Instagram site. Can you see that?
No, read it.
If you do not tell the truth about yourself, you cannot tell it about other people.
Yeah.
So
that's Virginia Woolf?
That was Virginia Woolf. Well, at that point, I began to think, you know, I might be onto something here. So I created a Trump file on my computer. And that was when I began to really kind of dig a little bit more deeply. Now, I just have to stop for a second, if I may, Rob, because I'm looking at a picture on my computer screen here that well, after discovering the Virginia Woolf quote, I created this Trump file, and now I realized I'm beginning to do some serious searching for what I would call Trump revealing or Trump illuminating quotations. And then I came across another quotation from Plato. This is another one of my little Instagram postings, but I want to show it to you as well, because this was a quotation that really fueled my energies to continue on. Okay, in the 4th century BC says, there is simple ignorance, which is the source of lighter offenses, and double ignorance, which is accompanied by a conceit of wisdom. And he who is under the influence of double ignorance fancies that he knows all about matters of which he knows nothing. Now, if you take the phrase, he fancies he knows all about matters of which he knows nothing, if you said that in 2016 or 2017 to 50 people on the street and say, who does this bring to mind? I think 8 out of 10 of them would have said, oh, clearly, you know, Donald Trump. And the fact that that observation was made in the 4th century BC just spoke volumes to me.
Yep, there were narcissistic asses and always have been and always will. And the challenge is, what do we do with them?
Yeah.
You know, that's where I've gotten into anthropology and understanding indigenous people, because I think that indigenous people don't put up with that nonsense. I think that civilization, with all its wonderful aspects, allows fools and jerks and just despicable people to have power and influence, and that's a sad thing.
Indeed. I agree. Anyway, back to Plato and Woolf and Maya Angelou. At that point, I'm just collecting quotations. I'm not really thinking much about these Trump file quotations, because I didn't think Trump had a chance of ever winning the election. Well, guess what happened? He wins. And I didn't handle it well. In fact, I think a case could be made that I was beginning after the inauguration to kind of slide into a little bit of a depression. Now, I've been in periods of depression before. When I first read Walden back in college, it was essentially a bibliotherapy exercise that my counselor suggested. He was one of those guys who believed that when you're trying to resolve any kind of problem, the worst thing you can do is just sit around and think about it on your own. He thought going to a counselor was a good idea, but he said the best thing you can do when you're struggling with a problem is read the works of great authors. And you know, the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer captured the brilliance of that recommendation when he said, Reading the works of great minds is like thinking with another person's brain other than your own.
Kind of like accessing someone else's mental operating system.
Absolutely. And
I love that.
Rene Descartes had said something very similar back in the 1600s. He was a great reader, and he felt that reading helped him solve all of his problems. And he once said, this is a paraphrase of his quotation, he said, reading the great works of others is like having a conversation with the greatest minds in history. Only, he said, it's a studied conversation in which they reveal only their best thoughts to us. And of course, when you get back to our original reason for talking with each other in the first place, what are their best thoughts? Their best thoughts are those things we now call quotations.
Yeah,
these little gems that we underline, that we put our little magic markers through them, that we write down on 3x5 index cards. So as I'm beginning to sink into this depression, in my efforts to cope with the disturbing reality of the Trump presidency, I make a formal commitment now to take a deep dive into the world's literature. And after 1 week, things began to change for me. And if I may, I would like to tell you the first quote I discovered.
Oh, good.
I remembered from my past that the patriarch of the Karamazov clan in The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, I remembered somewhere in my apperceptive mass that he was kind of a Trump-like figure, sort of vain and buffoonish, and at any rate, so I read now The Brothers Karamazov, this classic novel in world literature, and Fyodor Karamazov is the father of 3 sons. And in one of the passages, he's visiting his youngest son's school, and he's interviewing one of his youngest son's teachers, a spiritual leader named Father Zosima. And he looks over at Father Zosima and he says, "What do I have to do to inherit eternal life?" And Zosima looks back at Karamazov and he says, "The first thing you have to do is stop lying, especially to yourself." And here's how the passage continues. Father Zosima immediately replies that people should not lie, especially to themselves. And then he continues, "A man who lies to himself and listens to his own lies comes to a point where he does not discern any truth, either in himself or anywhere around him, and thus falls into disrespect towards himself and others." Well, again, I'm having the same visceral, deep reaction to these quotations. You know, these are, I mean, it's deeply reinforcing to me to see that this character named Donald Trump looks like he's being described to a perfect T by people who were writing centuries before. And then listen, go ahead. Did you want to interrupt there?
Yeah, we've got to take a break now, and we'll be back on the other side of the show ID. And my guest for this show is Dr. Mardy Grothe. He's a retired psychologist and the author of 7 previous quotation anthologies. And his new book is Deconstructing Trump, the Trump phenomenon through the lens of quotation history. Now, you were telling us about what you got from Dostoevsky. So finish that up and let's keep going. This is really a fascinating, fun interview.
Well, thank you, Rob. So I read this first passage from The Brothers Karamazov, and it's moving me deeply. And then Father Zozima in this passage continues, and what he goes on to say could have been written 2 years ago about Donald Trump. Listen to this. A man who lies to himself is often the first to take offense. It sometimes feels very good to take offense, doesn't it? And surely he knows that no one has offended him and that he himself has invented the offense and told lies just for the beauty of it, that he has exaggerated for the sake of effect, that he has picked on a word and made a mountain out of a pea. He knows all of that, and still he is the first to take offense. He likes feeling offended. It gives him great pleasure, and thus he reaches the point of real hostility. Well,
it's amazing.
Now, I'm hooked. The notion now of continuing to compile quotations that say something that will help us understand the current president of the United States a little bit better became my mission. And so it just continued for the next couple of years, and it ultimately led to this book. But if I might, after getting this strike from Karamazov, I decided I'm going to check out Tolstoy. And I found another passage from this great Russian author.
So basically you were exploring Trump's deep Russian connection.
Apparently, I hadn't thought about that before, but this might be something for the Mueller investigation.
There you go.
So now I find myself reading a little-known book by Tolstoy called Haji Murad. It's the story of a Chechen rebel who's fighting against the Russian takeover of his country. And Russia at the time is being led by Nicholas I. And according to Tolstoy, Nicholas I is, well, he sounds exactly like Trump. He's vain, he's insecure, he's susceptible to flattery. And so I come across this passage. I'll just read the full paragraph. Tolstoy took a dim view of Nicholas I, and his book offers a number of passages that depict him as vain, ineffectual, and susceptible to flattery. At one point, after Nicholas was praised by one of his aides, the narrator says of him, "This praise of his strategic abilities was especially pleasing to Nicholas because, though he was proud of his strategic abilities, at the bottom of his heart, he was aware that he had none. And now he wanted to hear more detailed praise of himself."
Reminds me of that moment when Trump had all of his council of advisors sitting at a table around him, each telling him how wonderful he was.
Believe me, that's the quote that came to mind when I saw that cabinet meeting. I mean, that was an event that I don't think any of us will ever forget. I mean, it felt like we were in North Korea or something, paying homage to the great leader. It was despicable.
It was. So now you've broken the book. You've got 1,000 quotes in this book. How have you organized it?
Well, it's organized A to Z, so it's by alphabet, and by the time we finish this interview, we may talk about 24 quotations. The quotations we'll talk about are quite stimulating. I think your listeners and viewers are going to say, "Ooh, that's kind of interesting. That does kind of sound like Trump." We're only scratching a handful of the quotations that appear in the book.
Right.
I mean, there's a wonderful quotation from Napoleon, who said, "When small men attempt great enterprises, they always end up by reducing them to the level of their mediocrity."
Nice.
I have thought about that quotation every single day of the Trump presidency.
It's what he's doing to our country. It's what he's doing to our reputation.
Yeah. The quotations are from all over the place, talking about what he's doing to our country. in 1932, just before Franklin Roosevelt won his very first election, he offered some thoughts in an interview about the presidency. And he said these words. He said, "The presidency is not simply an administrative job. The presidency is ultimately a place of moral leadership." Now, can you find me one person in the world today who would say, oh, by the way, and when he made that observation, he also said, the president is a leader of thought, advancing ideas that are appropriate and necessary for the time. And you know, we've had varying levels of quality amongst our presidents since FDR, but you know, Nixon was the only other president that we've had that really made us question this notion of the presidency as a place of moral leadership. But I don't think there's a person in America, even amongst Trump's most ardent supporters, who would say now that the presidency under his leadership is a place of moral leadership. It's sad.
Yeah. So I was looking in the book for Shakespeare.
Yeah.
What are your favorite Shakespeare quotes about him? I see one that you kind of hold out, but the saying is true: the empty vessel makes the greatest sound.
Well, this is really interesting that you bring that quote up, because this comes from King Henry V. And in King Henry V, Shakespeare, in the passage you are selecting, is just passing along a very popular proverb that goes back to maybe ancient times, which is empty vessels make the most noise. But just before that passage is a quotation that even many Shakespeare scholars are not familiar with. It comes from a little known character. He's just called the boy in the play, and he's describing a veteran of foreign wars who comes home and is always talking about his bravery and his valor, and the boy, speaking about this buffoonish military guy, said, I did never know so full a voice issue from so empty a heart." And when I see Trump talking in the way in which he does, again and again and again and again, that quote comes to mind: a full voice coming from an empty heart.
I love the idea of an empty heart. That is Trump. That really is.
Yeah.
A narcissist too, but it's Trump for sure. But yeah, he is. Sweet mercy is nobility's true badge. It's another Shakespeare one from.
There's a bunch of there. Yeah, Shakespeare fans will not be disappointed by my Deconstructing Trump book. And you know, I scan, you know, the entire array of great thinkers. And in fact, you know, we now know, of course, that Trump has got tremendous support from evangelical Christians. Well, as I was working on the book, I began to put together some quotations from the Bible that I thought did kind of speak to to Trump's nature. And you know, I'm not a biblical scholar, but you know, I was rounding up kind of the usual suspects. You know, I had you know, the love of money is the root of all evil, and you know, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall, and woe to those who call good evil and evil good. You know, I had all of those passages, but I only had probably 10 quotations from the Bible. And then one day I was chatting with a friend of mine who's a daily scripture reader. She also happens to be a Trump detractor. And so she said, oh, there's lots more quotations in the Bible that capture Trump. And so after that conversation with her, I decided to take a deeper look. So I spent about 2 months just reading the Bible. I hadn't done this in a long time. I just want to read 3 or 4 quotations only from the book of Proverbs. I've got 50 of them in the book, but listen to these from the book of Proverbs. Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. Everyone who is arrogant is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished. A fool's mouth is his ruin, and his lips are a snare to himself. And then finally, do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. Now, we're talking scripture here, Rob. And one of the things that has just fascinated me is how many people who describe themselves as born-again Christians, evangelical Christians, daily scripture readers, they have voted enthusiastically for Trump and continue to support him despite passages like this, which I think suggests another interpretation of how we should look at him.
Yes, absolutely. So I was browsing a little more. I found a couple more I want to throw in.
Oh, please.
Exaggeration is a species of lying. That's by Baltasar Gracian in The Art of Worldly Wisdom,
Yeah.
1647. And then one of my favorites is Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Oh, my favorite quote about Trump from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Oh, God. No change of circumstance will repair a defect of character.
Yes, that's
I
right.
mean, you know, here is this guy. He's just a real estate agent in New York, going up and down, supported by his father's money, going bankrupt time and time again, you know, concocting all of these con artist-like schemes like Trump University. And all of a sudden he gets elected to become president of the United States. And, you know, no change of circumstance is going to repair that defect of character. Anyway, I interrupted you. Was there another one from Emerson you liked?
Yeah, well, the louder he talked of his honor, the faster we counted our spoons.
Yeah.
And then the next one, what you are stands over you and thunders so that I cannot hear what you say to the contrary.
Yeah, yeah. You know, we talked earlier about FDR's view of the presidency and a place of moral leadership. One of the other, I think, tragic things that has happened with the Trump presidency is we have always looked at our presidents, whether they've succeeded in doing it or not. We've looked to them to elevate us, to help us see our better angels. And the French writer George Sand, in a letter she wrote back in the 1850s, said, this is from memory, she said, "We all run the risk of declining unless someone rises up to tell us that life is on the heights and not in the cesspools." And, you know, think about it. We no longer see our president, the president of this wonderful country that we all love, as somebody that is elevating us to live our lives in a more noble way. But every single day we see examples of life that's taking us down just a little bit closer to the cesspools. That Sharpie incident with the hurricane map just the other day is just another reminder of a man who has no regard for the truth. And of course, see, this is probably the greatest tragedy of the current administration. People have been reminding us of how important the truth is since Confucius. In the 6th century BC, Confucius said, language must be in accordance with things. And when language is not in accordance with the truth, things will not be carried on to success. Plato said, false words are not just an evil in and of themselves, they infect the world with evil. So when we see somebody who is so careless with the truth, why do we believe anything that he's going to be able to say to us about anything? It's a sad commentary, I think.
It is. It is. So what are some more contemporary quotations that you have, that you've collected from?
Okay, this is from memory now. Remember Peg Bracken? She wrote the I Hate to Cook cookbook. She said, life is so very simple when you have no facts to confuse you.
Yeah.
Eric Hoffer, the longshoreman philosopher, remember him? He said, rudeness is a weak man's imitation of strength.
Here I found another one from the 20th century, from Karl Popper.
Oh, yeah.
Who was a scientific philosopher.
Yeah.
He wrote about paradigm shifts.
He did.
Yeah. He wrote, ignorance is not a simple lack of knowledge, but an active aversion to knowledge, the refusal to know issuing from cowardice, pride, or laziness of mind. Yeah. Boy, is that a description of Trump. My God.
Well, this is really interesting that you bring that one up, because the laziness of mind thing shows up in lots and lots and lots of ways with him. But one of the ways it shows up is he doesn't read any books. What's the name of the guy? Schwartz, who wrote the book Art of the Deal? Trump's so-called autobiography.
Yeah.
He has claimed that he does not believe Donald Trump has ever read a full and complete book since he was in elementary school. And one of my favorite quotes of all time comes from Harry Truman, who said, not all readers can be leaders, but all leaders must be readers. And this came home to me in a big way when I was doing my research for the book. And I discovered that in 1962, John Kennedy read a book called The Guns of August by the historian Barbara Tuchman. Her book, which went on to win the Pulitzer Prize that year, was a story, a detailed story about the first couple of months of World War I. John Kennedy was so taken with what Tuchman read in that book that he invited her to come speak to his staff at the White House. But before she spoke, he made her book required reading for every single member of his staff. And Theodore Sorensen even said he wanted us to be sure that we understood the nature of his concern. Now, just think about this. Can you imagine in today's presidency, Donald Trump reading a book by a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and being so taken by the compellingness of her arguments that he said, wow, I got to have my people read this? I mean, the idea is laughable. I mean, not only does he not read, if you knew any other person in your world who was 70 years old and watched TV for 6 hours a day, and who spent maybe 2 or 3 hours a day tweeting, often in the most nasty, vicious way, and with tweets that are filled with inaccuracies and mistruths. I mean, what would you think about that person if that was your neighbor or your uncle? Well, that person is our president.
And your book, Deconstructing Trump, the Trump phenomenon through the lens of quotation history, helps people to think about him the same way that the smartest people in the history of the world did, really. You really provide words that add a perspective to Trump that is just phenomenal. I love it. It's really a fun book that is just really smart and so well put together.
Can I say one last thing about that? Thank you for that. But I didn't write this book for people who hate Trump. My primary audience when I wrote this book were for the 90 million people in America that did not vote in the last election. You know, go back to the election of 2016. What happened? 63 million people voted for Hillary Clinton. Just under 60 million people voted for Donald Trump. 90 million people did not vote. I'm hoping that every Trump detractor out there is going to not just look at this book and enjoy it for themselves, but will maybe consider loaning their book to somebody who didn't vote in the last election. Plato said it really well in the 4th century BC. He said, people who refuse to participate in political affairs will end up being governed by their inferiors.
And you know, it's like you said at the beginning of this interview, when you work with quotations, you type them into the computer. So what people can do is even from this interview, but hopefully from your book, they'll type in some of these. They're almost all really short quotes. I mean, they'll type in, couple dozen words and share them on Facebook and Instagram and get the word out about deconstructing Trump, looking at how you think about Trump, how the smartest people in the world described him before he was born. Yeah.
You asked about contemporary quotes. Can I mention one other that comes to mind?
Mention a few.
Oh, great. I don't know if you know the woman's name, Laurie R. King. Laurie R. King is a wonderful writer who lives in California, and she has written 19 books that have brought the Sherlock Holmes stories to modern times. And she concocted a feisty, independent, sort of feminist female character named Mary Russell. And right after World War I, in her first novel out of the 19, Sherlock Holmes, who's now a middle-aged guy, meets this 16-year-old girl, and he's taken with her independence and feistiness, and she becomes kind of a sleuth in training, studying under him. So Laurie King now has written this entire series of Sherlock Holmes, Mary Russell novels. In one of her novels, Sherlock Holmes says to Mary Russell, using insult instead of argument is the sign of a weak mind. And again, what have these people done for us? What they've done for us is they've given us these pithy, easily memorable quotes that kind of capture what's going on in our own world.
Well, I'm writing that one down. Using insult instead of argument is the sign of a weak mind. And the reason I'm writing it down is because I publish opednews.com, which sees 150 to 800,000 unique visitors a month. And we get trolls. We get people who get nasty, who engage in ad hominem attacks on other people.
Yes.
And boy, this sure applies to that. Using insult instead of argument is the sign of a weak mind.
Yeah.
Is that the exact quote?
Using insult instead of argument is the sign of a small mind.
Of a small mind. All right. That's going to go up on Op-Ed News. And
perfect. I'm glad I was able to offer one more. Talking about this business of carelessness with the truth, we use that phrase all the time, but I think Einstein was the first guy to actually use the phrase in a speech he gave in 1936. He said, "Whoever is careless with the truth in small matters cannot be trusted in important matters." And so guys like Einstein, when they start talking about ideas like that, I'm going to pay attention.
yeah, that's and what I've come to believe is the worst things that Trump has done, we're not going to find out about until after he's gone.
Yeah. I would like to find another Einstein quote for you, if I may.
Sure.
Because when I found this, I've got to go to my E section of the book. It'll just take 1 second as we're doing this, because when I found this particular quote by Einstein, I can't tell you how excited I got. I'm getting close to it.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. This is a 1936 speech that Einstein is delivering in Albany, New York. Desire for approval and recognition is a healthy motive, but the desire to be acknowledged as better, stronger, or more intelligent easily leads to an excessively egoistic psychological adjustment, which may become injurious for the individual and for the community.
Amen.
I think a lot of people would say that the Trump presidency has been injurious to the nation in which we live.
It sure has. My gosh. And so we've got a wrap. So any last words, last quotes, anything you want to finish with? Again, give us your website.
My website for this book is www.deconstructingtrump.com. Regarding last thoughts, this is a self-published book. When I decided to write this book, it was too late to interest any of the major publishers in it, and they weren't all that interested anyway. So for people to expect that they're going to find this book in their local bookstore just like that is probably not going to happen. And so what I'm saying to people is be a little persistent. If your bookstore doesn't have it in stock, ask your bookstore manager to order a copy. The book is also widely available online. The publication date for the book is September 23rd, 2019. I'm asking people to give it a look. And the other thing I'm asking them to do is, if this book stimulates some thoughts in your mind or leads you to say to yourself, wow, he doesn't have one of my favorite quotes that should be in the book, there's a way to contact me by my website. Send those quotes along, please. I'd enjoy
Okay, and we've got a wrap. You've been listening to Dr. Mardy Grothe, and he's the author of the book, Deconstructing Trump, the Trump Phenomenon Through the Lens of Quotation History. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Rob.